In the small village of Domremy, nestled in the northeastern fields of France, life once moved at a humble, predictable rhythm. Mornings began with the crowing of roosters, the rustle of wheat fields swaying in the wind, and the tolling of the church bell that called the faithful to prayer. Yet beneath this quiet simplicity, the world was burning. France was torn apart by the 100 Years' War. English soldiers and their Burgundian allies ravaged the countryside, torching villages, stealing harvests, and leaving behind hunger, despair, and fear. It was in this broken land that a girl was born, Joan d'Arc, the child who would later be known to the world as Joan of Arc. She was the daughter of peasants, illiterate, barefoot more often than not, her hands rough from farm labor. Her life revolved around tending sheep, drawing water, and kneeling in prayer at the tiny village church. To anyone watching, she was nothing more than a simple country girl. No one could have imagined that her name would one day echo across centuries, that she would stand at the head of armies and shake the might of kingdoms. One afternoon, around the age of 13, Joan walked across the fields, her skirt brushing against tall grass, a wooden basket in her hands. The sky glowed golden with the setting sun, the shadows of trees stretching long and dark. Then, everything changed. She heard a voice, gentle yet commanding, not from any man or woman she knew, but from somewhere beyond. "Joan, you are chosen." Her heart pounded. She froze, her eyes darting to the horizon. Suddenly, a brilliant light broke before her, overwhelming, blinding. In the midst of that radiance, she would later say, appeared the Archangel Michael and Saints Catherine and Margaret. Their words rang like thunder wrapped in silk. "You will lead France. You will help your king. You will drive the enemy from this land." Joan fell to her knees, trembling. I am only a girl from Domremy. I cannot even read. How could I possibly lead soldiers into war?" The voice returned, resolute, unshaken. "Your strength will not come from men. It will come from God. Believe and do not fear." For days, for weeks, Joan kept this secret. Who would believe her? A peasant girl, claiming to see angels, to hear divine voices. She prayed longer in the village church, her hands clasped so tight they left marks on her skin, tears wetting her cheeks. But the voices did not leave her. They came again and again with the same urgent command. "You must go. You must act. France depends on you." Images of smoldering villages, starving children, and the defeated Dauphin. Charles haunted her thoughts, each vision carved deeper into her heart until she could no longer turn away. One evening, sitting with her family by the flickering hearth, Joan whispered words that startled even herself. "One day, I must leave Domremy." Her father, Jacques, frowned. "Leave? Joan, you're a child. Your place is here in the fields with your mother, not wandering into war." Joan lowered her gaze, clutching the small wooden cross she always carried, her voice barely above a breath. "It is not I who choose this path. It is God." Beneath her youthful face, something unshakable had begun to form, a quiet determination, forged in visions and voices, stronger than the doubts of those around her. The world still saw her as a barefoot farm girl, but within her a spark had ignited, a spark that would soon become a blaze, one that would rally a broken nation and strike fear into the hearts of its enemies. And this was only the beginning. The voices that had once filled Joan with awe and wonder soon became a burden heavier than any plow she had pushed in the fields of Domremy. "Go to Charles, the Dauphin of France," they urged. "He needs you. You must crown him king in Reims. Without you, France will fall." The command burned in her chest like fire. But the world outside her village was merciless. The English army controlled vast territories, and their Burgundian allies struck fear into every French heart. For a girl of 16 to think she could walk into the halls of power, let alone the battlefield, was nothing short of madness. At first, Joan told no one but her confessor. The village priest, Father Jacques, listened as she whispered her visions, her eyes shining with both conviction and fear. "They say I must go to Charles. Father, she said, her hands trembling as they clutched the wooden cross. They tell me I must save France. The priest frowned, his brow furrowing like deep scars. Child, many have claimed to hear voices. Some were saints, others were deceived. Do you truly believe these voices come from God? Joan's eyes did not waver. Yes, Father. I believe with all my soul. Yet doubt clouded his gaze. He gave her penance, told her to pray more, to wait. But waiting was impossible. Each night the voices pressed harder, more insistent. Each day, she felt the weight of destiny pulling her away from the safety of Domremy. When she finally confided in her parents, their reaction was harsher. Her father's voice thundered across the wooden table. Enough, Joan! You're a foolish girl. These are fantasies. Women do not lead armies, nor do they crown kings. If you dare leave this village, I swear, I would rather drown you myself than see you fall into disgrace. Her mother, Isabel, tried to soften the blow, but fear lined her face. My child, the world is cruel to girls. If you speak of visions, they will call you mad, or worse, a witch. Stay here, stay safe. But Joan's resolve only deepened. I cannot stay while France bleeds. God has chosen me. If I turn away, I betray him. Her father slammed his fist against the table. Then you bring shame upon this family. The fire crackled in silence, its glow painting their faces in sorrow and anger. Joan knew in that moment she would find no ally under her roof. The villagers whispered about her strange behavior. They saw her praying alone for hours in the chapel, her lips moving feverishly, her eyes red from tears. They muttered in the marketplace, "The girl is bewitched. She claims she speaks with angels. She will bring ruin to us all." One evening, as she walked through the fields, two boys mocked her, their laughter sharp as knives. "So, Joan, when will you march to war? Shall we fetch you a wooden sword and a goat to ride?" Joan stopped, her chest heaving, but her voice was calm. "Mock me if you must. But the day will come when France will need me, and you will remember these words." The boys sneered, but behind their jeers lingered unease. There was something in her eyes, unyielding, burning, that unsettled even the cruelest tongues. The conflict was not only with her family and neighbors, it was with herself. Some nights, Joan lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the small farmhouse, doubt gnawing at her heart. What if they are right? What if I am nothing but a foolish girl? But then, in the silence, the voices returned, steady and radiant. "Do not fear, Joan, God is with you. He does not choose as men do. He chooses the humble to shame the mighty." Her heart steadied. The fear did not vanish, but it became fuel. At last, she made a decision that would tear her life apart. She would leave Domremy. To do so, she needed help. She turned to a local relative and friend, Durand-Lassois, who listened to her trembling words by the glow of a lantern. "I must go to the Dauphin," she said. "God commands it, but I cannot go alone." Durand studied her, torn between disbelief and admiration. "Joan, this is madness, but I see the fire in you. Perhaps you truly are chosen." He agreed to take her to the nearby town of Vaucouleurs, where the local commander, Robert de Baudricourt, held authority. If she could convince him, she might yet reach the Dauphin. The journey was filled with stares, with suspicion, with laughter at the idea of a peasant girl speaking of war and kings. But Joan pressed on, every insult falling against her like rain against stone. At Vaucouleurs, she stood before Baudricourt, a hardened soldier with no patience for foolishness. His armor gleamed, his scowl was sharp, and his hall echoed with the clank of steel. "You?" he barked, laughter bursting from his chest. "A farm girl? You expect me to send you to the Dauphin? France needs swords, not children's prayers." Joan met his gaze without flinching. "France needs more than swords. France needs hope. And God has sent me to give it." Her words hung in the air, daring, defiant. The men around Baudricourt chuckled, but unease crept into their faces. For though she was only a girl, her voice carried the weight of something greater. Joan had set her path. But in choosing it, she had ignited conflict on every side, with her family, her village, the authorities, and even within her own soul. The world saw her as delusional, reckless, dangerous. But Joan knew this was only the beginning of a battle far greater than she had ever imagined. The stone walls of Vaucouleurs loomed tall and unforgiving, echoing with the clash of steel and the bark of commands. Soldiers laughed at Joan as she walked through the courtyard, her homespun dress tattered from travel, her hair tangled from wind and dust. Yet her eyes burned with a light that no ridicule could extinguish. Day after day, she returned to Robert de Baudricourt, the commander who had dismissed her as a foolish girl. She begged him, pleaded with him, declaring the same message with unwavering conviction. God has sent me to save France. I must see the Dauphin, Baudricourt scoffed each time. Go home, child. France is drowning in blood. We need knights, not shepherd girls. But Joan refused to bend. She prayed in the chapel, fasted until her body ached, and told anyone who would listen that victory would come through God's hand, if only she could reach Charles. Rumors began to stir. Some whispered she was mad. Others, curious, leaned closer. A few soldiers, hardened men who had lost comrades and villages to English swords, watched her with suspicion, but also with something they had long forgotten: hope. One evening, in the glow of the hearth, a soldier asked, "Girl, why do you not give up? No one believes you." Joan's reply was calm but fierce. "Because I do not need your belief. I need only God's. And he has told me what I must do." The soldier fell silent, unsettled. Weeks turned into months, and still Joan would not leave. Her persistence became impossible to ignore. When word came of another French defeat, despair deepened in the garrison. Men drank heavily, cursing the Dauphin's weakness. France seemed on the brink of collapse. And yet, there was Joan. Standing in the courtyard, speaking with conviction beyond her years. She painted visions of a crowned king, a liberated France, a God who had not abandoned them. At last, even Baudricourt hesitated. He had mocked her, scorned her, called her delusional, but still she returned, unshaken, unafraid. Then came the turning point. Joan told him of a French defeat before any messenger had arrived. The details were exact, chilling. When news confirmed her words days later, Baudricourt stared at her with new eyes. Perhaps, just perhaps, she was no ordinary girl. Reluctantly, he granted her an escort. A small group of soldiers, doubtful and grumbling, would take her to Chinon, where the Dauphin Charles lingered in a haze of indecision. The journey was dangerous, through forests, rivers, and territories where English patrols roamed. Joan cut her hair short, donned men's clothing for the first time, and strapped a small sword at her side. It was not vanity, but protection. "God commands me to remain pure," she explained, "and this will guard me among men." The soldiers laughed, but as they traveled, their laughter gave way to awe. Joan rode tirelessly, praying aloud each night, lifting the spirits of weary men. When danger threatened, she stood unafraid, her gaze fixed on the horizon. By the time they neared Chinon, the soldiers no longer mocked her. They followed her. At Chinon, the court of Charles was a place of intrigue and doubt. Nobles whispered of betrayal, generals argued over strategies that never bore fruit, and the Dauphin himself, frail, uncertain, hid in shadows, reluctant to claim his crown. When Joan arrived, Charles devised a test. He disguised himself as one of his courtiers, hoping to expose her as a fraud. The hall glittered with torches, tapestries fluttered in the draft, and dozens of nobles watched with mocking smiles as Joan entered. She should have been lost, confused, but she walked straight through the crowd, past the richly dressed men, and knelt before the disguised Dauphin. "My Lord Dauphin," she said softly, her voice carrying like a bell, "I am sent by God to give you your kingdom." Gasps rippled through the hall. Charles froze, his disguise shattered. Slowly he rose. For the first time in months, hope flickered in his eyes. Still, many doubted. Priests tested her, nobles questioned her, generals dismissed her. But Joan answered with humility and fire. "I am but a maid," she said. "I know nothing of war, but God will show me what must be done. If you trust him, France will be saved." Then she revealed her mission: to lift the siege of Orléans, where English forces had encircled the city, starving it into surrender. The court was stunned. Orléans was considered doomed. No commander dared to break the siege. For Joan to even speak of it was audacity. But audacity, it seemed, was exactly what France needed. At last, Charles agreed. Joan would be given armor, a banner, and command, not over strategy, but over the spirit of men. The blacksmiths hammered a suit of shining plate, crafted not for a knight, but for a girl. Joan wept when it was laid before her, not out of vanity, but reverence. She carried not a sword as her true weapon, but a white banner emblazoned with the names of Jesus and Mary. When she rode into camp, soldiers stared in disbelief. A girl clad in armor claiming to be God's messenger. Some laughed, others cursed, but when she spoke, her voice pierced their cynicism. Men of France, do not despair. The God of heaven fights for us. If you follow me, the siege will be broken. Orléans will be free. Her faith was contagious. Soldiers who had sunk into hopelessness lifted their heads. Generals who had quarreled fell silent. For the first time in years, an army stirred with something greater than fear. The rise of Joan of Arc had begun. From the fields of Domremy to the court of Chinon, from ridicule to command, she had forced her way through doubt, resistance, and scorn. Now, with the weight of France on her shoulders, she would march toward Orléans, toward destiny, and toward the fire of history. The city of Orléans lay in suffocating despair. For months, English forces had choked its lifeblood, encircling the walls with towers, trenches, and wooden bastilles. Smoke curled from ruined homes. Hunger gnawed at the people within. And every toll of the church bells echoed like a countdown to surrender. France's hope was dying. Then, like a vision, she arrived. A girl in shining armor, carrying a white banner embroidered with lilies, rode into the weary camp of French soldiers. Her presence was so jarring, so unexpected, that hardened men stared as though heaven itself had descended. Joan of Arc. Her banner snapped in the wind, bright against the mud and gloom. She spoke, and her voice carried not like that of a commander, but of a prophet. Men of France, despair no longer. God has sent me to lift this siege. If you will follow, Orléans will be free. The soldiers looked at one another, torn between mockery and awe. Some spat into the dirt. Others crossed themselves, and yet something stirred. Her certainty, her burning conviction, pierced the fog of hopelessness like a blade through armor. That night, Joan walked the camp, speaking to the men one by one. She urged them to confess their sins, to put aside quarrels and drunkenness, to prepare themselves for battle as if for holy service. France is not lost, she whispered to a soldier clutching his rosary with trembling hands. But you must believe, God does not fight with cowards. By dawn, a transformation rippled through the camp. Soldiers who had been shadows of men stood straighter, sharper. Their eyes followed Joan's banner as though it were a beacon of light in endless night. The English scoffed at rumors of a peasant girl leading the French. From their towers they jeered, their arrows tipped with mockery. "Go home, witch!" they cried. "Tend your sheep, girl!" But Joan answered their laughter with prayer, kneeling in the mud as her army prepared to strike. The first assault came against one of the English bastilles, a wooden fortress that bristled with arrows and steel. Cannons roared, smoke choked the air, men fell screaming into the trenches. Fear surged like a black tide. Joan rode into the chaos. Her banner lifted high above the din, her voice cutting through the thunder of war. "Do not retreat! Forward! God commands it!" Arrows hissed past her. A stone crashed nearby, shattering earth and bodies alike. Yet Joan did not flinch. Her courage became a shield for the men. They surged forward, emboldened, battering the walls until the Bastille trembled and broke. The French had tasted victory, but the English held firm. Each fortress was a beast, and there were many. The days that followed were a blur of battle, smoke, and prayer. Joan was everywhere at once, tending the wounded, rallying the fearful, riding where the fight was fiercest. Then came the day that would decide all, the assault on Les Tourelles, the strongest English stronghold guarding the bridge into Orléans. The French attacked with fury. But the English rained down fire and arrows. The river frothed red with blood. Siege ladders splintered. Men screamed as boiling pitch poured over them. In the thick of it, Joan stood at the front, her banner raised like lightning against the storm. She shouted above the clash, "Hold fast! Victory is near!" But then a cry of horror. An arrow struck Joan, piercing her shoulder. She collapsed, blood staining her armor. The French faltered, despair rushing back into their hearts like poison. "She is wounded! God has abandoned us!" Men shouted. Carried to the rear, Joan writhed in pain. A priest bent over her, urging her to rest. But Joan gritted her teeth, clutching her banner. "No!" she gasped. "I will not abandon them. This wound is nothing. God's promise still stands." Through sheer will, she rose again, pale but unbroken. She returned to the field, her banner lifted high. The sight electrified the French. A girl, bleeding, staggering, yet unyielding, marching forward as though death itself could not claim her. "Forward!" she cried. "Do not fear, the victory is ours!" The French roared. With renewed fury, they surged upon Illiterate. Ladders crashed against the walls, men climbed with desperate strength. The English fired wildly, but the tide had turned. At last, with a thunderous crash, the French broke through. Illiterate fell. The siege was shattered. The English, stunned, retreated in chaos. Their soldiers fled across the river, their arrogance crumbling into dust. Orléans was free. Inside the city, church bells pealed as never before. Men wept openly. Women threw flowers into the streets. Children cried, "Vive la pucelle!" Long live the maid. Joan rode into Orléans, her banner glowing white against the smoke-darkened sky. She did not bask in glory. She did not smile at the cheering crowds. She simply bowed her head in prayer. "Not to me, Lord," she whispered, "but to you the glory." The world was stunned. A peasant girl, once mocked and dismissed, had achieved what seasoned generals could not. Whispers spread across France. This was no ordinary maid. This was God's chosen. The Dauphin himself could no longer ignore her. He summoned her to march at his side, not merely to fight battles, but to achieve what seemed impossible. His coronation at Reims, deep in enemy territory. For Joan, victory at Orléans was not the end. It was the beginning of something far greater, a path that would crown a king, reshape a nation, and seal her fate forever. The flames of destiny now burned around her, and Joan of Arc walked straight into the fire. The victory at Orléans was only the spark. Joan's fire blazed brighter still. With her banner leading the way, the Dauphin's army marched north, cutting through resistance, scattering enemies who once seemed invincible. Her presence became legend, a living miracle who turned despair into faith. And in Reims Cathedral, with the nation watching, she stood beside Charles as the sacred oil anointed his brow. The Dauphin was no longer a doubtful prince. He was King Charles VII of France, and the Maid of Orléans had made it so. But kings are fickle, and politics colder than steel. As France rallied under its crowned monarch, the English regrouped, striking again with brutal force. The war dragged on. Joan, restless, pressed Charles for more action, for bold campaigns to finish what had begun. But the court, cautious and divided, began to see her less as savior and more as burden. Still, Joan would not stop. She led another campaign, this time against Compiègne. There, in May of 1430, the tide turned. During a skirmish at the gates, the French forces faltered. The drawbridge closed before she could retreat. Surrounded, she fought fiercely, but was dragged from her horse and captured. Her banner fell from her grasp. The maid was no longer free. Sold to the English, Joan was locked in a dank cell, guarded by men who mocked her. But worse than chains was betrayal. King Charles, whom she had crowned, made no move to rescue her. The court that had once cheered her now turned its back in silence. Her captors wasted no time. They demanded she face trial, not as a prisoner of war, but as a heretic, a sorceress, a blasphemer. It was not justice. It was vengeance. The trial was a theater of cruelty. Learned men of the church, cloaked in authority, hurled questions designed to trap her. They demanded she admit her voices were demons, that her visions were lies. But Joan stood firm. "My voices come from God," she declared. "They have guided me since I was 13. I will not deny them." Her words cut through the halls like a blade. But the judges had no ears for truth. Days turned into weeks. They starved her, threatened her, pressed her with endless interrogations. Yet Joan, illiterate, alone, and 19 years old, stood against the greatest scholars of her time and often outwitted them. Her courage only deepened their hatred. In the end, they condemned her. Not as soldier, not as rebel, but as heretic. The sentence was death, and the instrument of death would be fire. On the morning of May 30th, 1431, Joan was led through the streets of Rouen. Crowds gathered, some jeering, others weeping. She wore a simple white gown. Her head was bare. At the marketplace stood the stake, piled high with wood and kindling. The soldiers bound her hands, tied her to the post. As the executioner prepared the torch, Joan asked for a cross. A sympathetic priest fashioned one from 2 sticks and placed it in her hands. She held it close, her voice breaking into prayer. "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus!" The flames rose, smoke choked the air. The fire consumed her gown, her body, her banner of hope. And yet, even as the inferno raged, witnesses swore they heard her voice calling on Christ until it was silenced forever. The Maid of Orléans was 19 years old. The crowd fell silent. Even hardened soldiers trembled, some whispering they had burned a saint. The executioner himself later confessed, horrified by what he had done. Joan's ashes were thrown into the Seine as if to erase her. But her memory was unquenchable. 25 years later, a retrial declared her innocent. The church confessed what the people had always known. Joan of Arc was no heretic. She was a martyr. Centuries after, the world would honor her as Saint Joan of Arc. Her life was short, her death brutal, yet her legacy eternal. She had no wealth, no education, no power, only faith, courage, and a voice that told her France could be free. And against all odds, she was right. Her story reminds us that even in the darkest times, a single soul can ignite hope, can defy kings and armies, can change the course of history. Joan walked into the flames with unshakable conviction. And from those flames, she rose into legend.